Thanks for having me tonight. I'm actually really honoured to be here to talk about our little project, which my sister-in-law and I started back in 2013. Before I talk about the project, I'd like to talk a little bit about my father because he's the reason I'm here tonight. My father was a very average man and not so average. He was a wonderful father, wonderful husband, great neighbour, looked after his community. He was called to serve in the Second World War by his king, and he went and fought in New Guinea. As most of the people, the men of his age did at the time. So it was, he was young, he was 19 or 20 here, beautiful, fresh-faced, gorgeous. And he came back from war relatively unscathed, although many of his mates didn't and many of them didn't come back. And he never ever talked about the war. I suspect it was probably his own private hell and he didn't want to share that with his children. Our memorialisation days, much like your Memorial Day, are Anzac Day and Remembrance Day each year, and he didn't really get involved in that sort of thing. He didn't see the benefit of actually catching up with his mates and talking about a war that they would have preferred to have forgotten. It was part of their lives. He wanted to just put it behind him. But I've got ahead of myself here, so I'll fast forward to 20 years later, and we're working on this project to honour our fathers. And what we decided to do was create 120 poppies. And you've all got a poppy on tonight. You would have seen them out in the foyer. I'm certainly wearing one. To honour our father's service. It was a very personal project, and we wanted to create these 120 poppies and plant them around my father's tree in the Avenue of Honour at the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne. We have this big Shrine of Remembrance. It's a huge building. It's absolutely stunning inside, and it's all about memorialisation. And there's a whole row of trees out the front that are dedicated to different battalions that fought in the war over, and it's for distinguished service. One of those trees belongs to my father, or my father's battalion, I should say. So, personal journey. The poppy is a really powerful symbol in Australia and other Commonwealth countries, and I'm sure it's got some significance in other countries around the world. And we're creating this 120 poppies to plant around my father's tree. And that's the plaque for his battalion, and they're our poppies that we made. The response to that was so incredibly powerful, it's hard to believe. These are knitted and crocheted poppies. The response was so powerful from our friends and family and community that we decided to take it to the public. And so the 5,000 Poppies project was created. The aim was to make 5,000 poppies, of course, for the Centenary of Anzac, which was coming up. So Australia, First World War, 4-year period in 1914 to 1918. Sorry, my math is not great. So this is the centenary of that period, and it's a very important time in Australia's history and, in fact, the world history. So we've decided to create 5,000 poppies and plant them in the centre of the city in Melbourne as part of that project. This is what we ended up creating for the launch of our program some couple of months later. And by that stage, we'd actually collected 5,000 poppies. So we had 2 years to do this project, and 4 months after we started it, we'd actually collected our 5,000. So it still amazes me. I still laugh because Margaret and I had made a spreadsheet about how many poppies we were actually going to have to make each before, so that we could actually make it to the end. But I don't think we needed to have worried. So by November that year, we had 5,000 poppies, and we hung them in this beautiful fracture gallery in the middle of Melbourne. And it received a lot of press. What we had no way of knowing was 50,000 people around the world would join us. And we also had no way of knowing that people all over the world would become champions of the project and make little groups that come together regularly to make poppies. And so we ended up by saying that, well, our timing was perfect. And at the launch of the project, we met the chairman of our Centenary Committee, the Anzac Centenary Committee in Melbourne, who asked us to become part of the formal program for the commemorative activities that were going to be going on between 2014 and 2018. And so we then decided to revise our target again to 100,000 poppies. We were doing it anyway. It was going to be simple, right? In any case, spreadsheet went out the window. Ted Baillieu, our mentor, became our biggest supporter and spruiked us all around the country, which was really wonderful of him. And then he introduced us to this guy. This guy's Philip Johnson, and he is arguably, no, not arguably, he actually is Australia's premier landscape designer. And he decided that this was going to be bigger than Ben-Hur. He became instantly enamoured with what we were doing. He had a great-grandfather who had fought in World War I and died on the Somme, so it had a very personal significance to him. And so, with the centenary approaching and Philip on board, we decided that 100,000 poppies was well and truly within our grasp. This was our first installation. It was just a little teaser, 5,000 poppies on stems, and we did it at the Melbourne International Flower and Garden Show. It was so powerful, probably the most powerful thing people had seen for a long time. And it was full of heart. And so, what happened was people really gravitated towards what we were doing, and we ended up collecting more poppies. For our first major installation, so this is a minor installation, we covered the steps of Federation Square in the heart of Melbourne, and that's about 800,000 square metres of poppies attached to nets so that they sit flat on the ground, and we had them cascading down these steps in Federation Square, and it was absolutely beautiful and really breathtaking. And we had 260,000 poppies. So the Centenary of Anzac was a pretty important time for us as a nation. 62,000 of our young men and a few women died in First World War for us. We were a nation much the same size as you are now, so about 4.5 to 5 million. 62,000 dead. 60,000 who returned home died within 10 years of repatriation. And we felt that really strongly as a nation. But 100 years on, this amazing grassroots project, masterpieces imbued with love, honour and respect, as rich in meaning as they were as rich in beauty, they were really breathtaking with this simple message: we value your service and we will not forget. In 2016, we were asked to take the whole shebang over to the Royal Horticultural Society Chelsea Flower Show. It was a bold installation in the grounds of the Royal Hospital Chelsea that had never been done before. The Chelsea Flower Show is a very small flower show, but it's probably the most prestigious one in the world. The royal family come along and walk around and meet people. But this was the first time that anybody had actually encroached into the grounds of the Royal Hospital. They'd guarded that area very jealously, but when we went to them and asked them if we could do it, they were more than pleased to do it. So we planted somewhere around 300,000 poppies in there, and shamelessly put a red carpet down the middle of it to invite the Queen to come and visit. And meet the Queen we did. So it's the first time in the history again of the show that the Queen came along with all of the royal family and onto one display. So we were the lucky ones. And Margie will tell you, Margie's sitting down here, she'll tell you, she spent 10 minutes with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge at her feet. It was a wonderful day. I'll just point this picture out to you here. This is me with Prince Harry. We'll come back to that. It really captured the imagination of the world. It's kind of interesting, that's not what we were really about, but what we were doing was sort of saying to people, you know, we care, we value your service, and this is a really good way to let them know it. 60 million views across all media, audited. Later that year, we were lucky enough to go across the ditch and do this installation in Fromelles in France for the Centenary of the Battle of Fromelles. It's a pretty important battle in the history of Australian warfare. It's probably the bloodiest battle, certainly the most impacting battle over a 24-hour period that Australia had ever seen. We lost, well, there were 5,500 odd casualties and approximately 2,000 of those people died, but that was a 24-hour period. So Fromelles is sacred turf for Australians. It's this little battle-scarred plot of land in the middle of nowhere in rural French landscape. It's got a couple of German blockhouses, if you know what they are, and one of our favourite sculptors has actually done this wonderful sculpture that depicts mateship. And mateship's kind of the key to the ethos of the Australian digger. But we still had work to do. While we were creating these massive installations for our overseas trips, we were also doing some smaller things for back home. We created the backdrop for a travelling show that the Australian War Memorial put on called the Spirit of Anzac Centenary Experience, which told the story of the First World War, and it travelled around Australia. It was absolutely stunning and a bit scary. We did a series of installations for the Victorian Government's State Library Writing the War exhibition, and it was a fantastically, hauntingly beautiful concert that was done at one of the major churches in the heart of the city of Melbourne, and we decorated the whole of, you only see a small part of it there, but we decorated the whole of the church for that concert. It was absolutely beautiful. We did an installation at our National Vietnam Veterans Museum. We did an installation at our Melbourne Museum. Looks a bit eerie there with the bones underneath it. This is just one image, but we decorated 14 towns across the Gippsland region, which is a very large geographic region in Melbourne, and we decorated 14 towns. It was huge and fantastic, and all of the locals got involved. I love that kind of whole local thing. And we did our own Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne. So that's one part of it, with about 12,000 stem poppies. But our aim, basically, for the end of the centenary was to take our installation to what is the spiritual home of memorialisation in Australia, which is the National War Memorial. And it feels really surreal still. But we did that just last week. So the centenary was last Sunday, a week ago today, and we planted 62,000 stemmed poppies in the lawns, perfectly manicured lawns. We killed them, but these perfectly manicured lawns at the Australian War Memorial. And it was just amazing. It is absolutely huge. It covers 4,000 square metres. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Thousands upon thousands have flocked to see it, not surprisingly. I think it's been the most photographed thing on social media for the last 5 weeks that it's been up. And at one stage we were trending on social media, and my son rang me and told me I was a rock star. We also planted, oh, that's a night shot, sorry. We also planted 300,000 poppies at our Parliament House, which is at the opposite end of the road. So these two buildings have been built particularly for the purpose of making sure that our parliamentarians understand that whatever happens in those hallowed halls has a direct impact on how we fare as a nation. And so we became involved with our Parliament House, so 300,000. And if I had the aerial shots of that, I'd show you. It was absolutely spectacular. We also did some smaller installations. That's our Shrine of Remembrance. There's a poem, or at least an ode, that we take from a poem by a guy called Lawrence Binion, and it's called The Ode. And it's, I don't know if any of you know it, probably not, but it starts, "They shall not grow old," and it's an ode to the fallen. And it's the most evocative poem I've ever heard, and it's just a small snippet. But we've surrounded our whole Shrine of Remembrance with metre-high letters with this ode on it, and created what I call a contemplative walk. And I think that the upshot of that is that people actually know that the War Memorial now has, the Shrine of Remembrance now has another side. That was pretty special. We also did some smaller installations. So this is all around the Centenary of Anzac that's sort of coming to fruition, and in fact came to fruition last week. Canberra Airport, Floriade in Canberra, the ACT Memorial, Point Cook Air Base. And there are also many hundreds, if not thousands, of 5,000 Poppies inspired projects happening all around the world. And these are just a couple of them. That was done by a florist. They're all poppies, by the way, knitted poppies. 62,000 poppies planted in Kings Park on the other side of Australia, in Western Australia. That doesn't look like 62,000, and it's not, but they did plant 62,000. Huge. 2 metre high letters, planted somewhere in New South Wales, I can't remember where. That's in Wales, in the UK. And I think what's happened here is that this all testifies to the depth of feeling for those people who have served and sacrificed. And it's been an incredible labour of love for everybody that's been involved in it. And Margie and I will both say it surprised us just how impacting it's been, both on the outside world but also on us, because it's made us realise that there's this generational grief that it's not been resolved since the First World War 100 years ago. That's just been passed down from generation to generation. It's been a very healing thing for a lot of people, and they write to us and talk to us about it. It's been an honour and a privilege for me, I have to say, to be involved in this project. It's just been wonderful. And if you wanted to know the final number of poppies that we've actually collected, it's almost 1 million. And that's just the poppies that we've collected for this particular project. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people out there doing it for their own local communities now. So we've spawned this whole remembrance thing that's happening out there, and you could easily double that 1 million number. In fact, you could probably triple it. For this particular project, nearly 2 million, no, I keep saying that's incredibly conservative, and it is. 2 million man-hours, volunteer hours, because this whole project is volunteer-run, by the way, including Marg and I. So we have this magnificent team, and this is a smattering of the 50,000 odd that have been involved in pulling all this together. But this is the team that is the glue that makes it all stick together. And that's the big part of our success. These people have been working with Margaret and I now for nearly 4, maybe 5 years in pulling all of these installations together. And it's a lot of work. They work incredibly hard. They do whatever we ask them to do. And sometimes we work well into the night, and it's all volunteer. It blows me away, really. So this has been my story. Every single contributor to this project has a story of their own. This is a story about my dad. For Margie, it's the story of her dad. And for every single contributor to the project, it's their personal story, which I find fascinating. We all do it for our own reasons. And I think that's part of the beauty of the project. It's a community project like no other. Handmade, grassroots, no budget. No budget. Everybody made their poppies from their own costs. Everybody sent us their poppies. We had budget to put in the major installations from the organisations that we were doing it for. Everything else, no budget. And it's become a global movement of sorts. There's this little thread of connection that connects us all together, and it goes right around the globe, connecting us to each other, connecting us to our communities, connecting us to the past, connecting us to our personal histories, and connecting us to the histories of others. But it also is connecting us to our present, and it's connecting us to the future, because these groups will go on and they'll continue to do this work. Some will continue to do the work that we've been doing and do it in their own local communities. Some will do other works, which is just wonderful. And a lot of people have stood up after this project and actually gone out and done very large projects of a different nature in their own local communities, which I think is just amazing. And so if you wanted to talk about making your mark or leaving a legacy, as I like to call it, Margaret and I are pretty proud of the legacy that we've left. So thank you for listening.